Welcome to Heads Together. I'm Bonnie Low-Kramen. I am your host. We have a very special 90-minute show scheduled today. The subject is a serious one: sexual assault in the workplace and abuse of power. And we are very fortunate to have an expert guest who is eager to not only discuss the issues very honestly, but to explore the solutions equally as honestly. But first, I want to tell you why I want to explore this complicated, messy, and really tough subject, which can be controversial and touch nerves and be emotional. Here's why. From the beginning of speaking and teaching Be the Ultimate Assistant workshops all over the world, I have found myself in rooms of mostly women of all ages, backgrounds, and ethnicities. And so many of them have shared their stories of workplace bullying, sexual harassment, and sexual assault that have happened to them at work. What I see over and over again is that when women feel safe, they will stand up in front of a room of people, men and women, and not necessarily people they know, and speak honestly. And sometimes the tears flow, and not only from the person talking, but for those of us who are listening. The thing that always gets me is that these stories that they tell often took place years ago, but in the telling of the story, hearing the exact details about where they were, what time of day it was, what they were wearing, the details are so vivid that it sounds like the story could have happened yesterday or last week. What's so obvious is that the pain is still present. The trauma is real and it can last a lifetime. What these women want most is to be seen and to be believed. For too long, this subject of sexual harassment, assault, workplace bullying have been covered with silence. And everyone on this call knows that nothing can be solved by looking the other way and pretending that a problem does not exist. Here at Heads Together, if you have been with us before, you know that I am committed to breaking the silence about issues that need to be discussed. Now, one piece of news that is very good news about the world we have today is that we now have social media in order to share information with each other. Today, our guest, Stacy Pinkerton, she did not have social media in 1986 when her story happened. We are now in a new era of accountability. We know since the Harvey Weinstein case broke in October of 2017 that very high-profile people have lost their jobs. Most recently, the headlines are apparent every single day. They certainly are today, but the most recent case that happened was Governor Cuomo in New York had to step down after 11 women accused him of sexual harassment. But this is most definitely not a far away story. This is a story of today, literally today, in the news today. Out of Afghanistan, the women of Afghanistan have started a new hashtag. The hashtag is called "Don't Touch My Clothes," because with the new government in Afghanistan, there is a move to have them put back on burqas, the women, and the women are fighting back. Social media is allowing us to see that women are standing up and fighting back. And I fear there may be violence, but they are willing to take that chance. There's another story, and this is not only an American story, this is international news, this story of sexual assault and harassment out of India. rape and sexual assault is a huge problem in India. And there's a case, you can Google it right this minute, that is being settled about a rape of a 9-year-old girl. And the caste system in India has so much to do with that. So you could read about that. But that's the news today. And another story out of today is right out of Washington, D.C., where the U.S. gymnasts, if you watch the Olympics, you saw Simone Biles, and you probably know some of the names, Ali Reisman. There's a group of U.S. gymnasts testifying in front of Congress today, September 15th, about how the FBI handled the investigation of their allegations of sexual assault against Dr. Larry Nassar, who is in jail right now for assaulting these young girls, these gymnasts. So this is most definitely not a faraway story. This is happening, as we speak. So those stories are just the tip of the iceberg. The stories I've heard in our workshops, perhaps there will be time to share one or two, but probably those of you on the call, you've been in rooms with me and you've heard those stories for yourselves. Please, as I'm talking, and when Stacy comes on, you are welcome to put your comments, your questions in the chat box. Jen Wilner, thanks, Jen. Jen's helping us from behind the scenes, and she will be helping us facilitate this conversation so that we can get to as much information as possible that will help others. So with that, I would like to tell you about our guest for today. I've only known Stacy for a number of weeks, so full disclosure there. A mutual colleague connected us, and she came to me because she was told that I'm a person who cares about these subjects of bullying and sexual assault, and indeed that happens to be very true. And after speaking with her, I invited her onto this program. So this is about the person you are about to meet. Her name is Stacy Pinkerton, and she was a bit of a tomboy as she grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. And Jen, when you're ready, you can put up that photo of Stacy. One of her two siblings, she was one of two siblings, and her dad was a strict dad. He was the captain of the fire department. And he taught Stacy to tough things out and to be independent. At age 20, she worked as a flight attendant for American Airlines, and she worked as a model. And she'd been modeling since she was 15 years old. It was on an airplane in 1986 out of Oklahoma when she was working in first class that she first met Bill Cosby and his male personal assistant. Stacy had met the personal assistant previously that early morning when the general manager of the hotel asked her to share her limo to the airport with this assistant. Every assistant on the call today can totally see this happening. I'm sure you can. I can feel you nodding. It was on that flight that Bill Cosby invited Stacy to be a guest on The Cosby Show, which filmed in New York City. Stacy was not sure that he was serious. He was sitting there with his assistant in first class on the plane. They exchanged contact information. Stacy returned home. She was based in Chicago. Pretty sure I remember that. She was in Chicago, and she found various voice messages from both the personal assistant and from Cosby himself. You can read all the details in Stacy's victims impact statement and public information from the trial. We're going to be providing resources throughout this this show today. So we're not really here to dive deeply into the nitty-gritty details, very painful details of what happened that night. But these are the broad strokes. For those wondering, Stacy did go to New York. They flew her to New York. She did a taping of one show of the Cosby Show, but she has never viewed it. She told me that she doesn't even know if she got cut out. She doesn't know if she was there. Never happened, because weeks later, before the episode aired, the assistant called her, and the assistant arranged for Stacy and Cosby to have a quote unquote business dinner in Chicago. And that was the night that she was drugged and raped. And Stacy's life has never been the same. She was 21 years old. Ultimately, Bill Cosby was accused by over 60 women of rape, which happened with the complicit assistance of other people and drugs put in drinks and food. And that is what's possible when you have fame, status, power, and money. After Bill Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, he was sentenced in September of 2018, Stacy spoke publicly for the first time, and she said, quote, at the time, she was quoted as saying, "I woke up from a state of unconsciousness, frightened for my life in Chicago. Through the years since that day, I kept moving from one address to another, across the Pacific Ocean, later on the Atlantic, settling in Europe." And in fact, she's coming to us today from Spain. No place was far enough from Mr. Cosby. She went on to say, "No matter what, these things stay with you forever," ending with, "If this happens to you or a loved one, please report it to law enforcement so it does not happen to someone else." Well, sometimes, and we all know that sometimes law enforcement is involved. And it's not as simple as that, unfortunately. So now in 2021, she's based in Spain. Stacy has a 28-year-old daughter who, not ironically, works as a personal assistant. Stacy is now involved with advocating for changes in laws on SOL, S-O-L, statutes of limitations on sexual assault and rape, and she's speaking and teaching on the subject of abuse of power. Stacy is here to answer your questions. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Stacy Pinkerton.
Hello,
Hi.
Bonnie. It's such an accurate detail that you portrayed, and I could hear a little bit of emotion and quiver in your voice, which I know so well. But
Yeah.
I appreciate so much the fact that you are addressing this issue, and it's just lovely to be here with both you, Bonnie, and Jen, who's doing all the back office work, so to speak. But
Hey, I need an assistant too. It's crazy. But we have viewers from all over the world joining us.
great.
Many of them are assistants, but many are not. And Stacy, I'm so moved that you're here and that you are willing to share pieces of your story in order to help others, because that's the reason you're doing it now. Yeah.
That's right. If I don't speak up, if we don't speak up, things will never change.
Yeah.
So what else is there to do?
Right.
We have
And
to
you have a daughter, 28,
Yeah.
and in the promotion over the last couple of weeks, when I was telling people and on social media, people knew that we were doing this, some of the comments were, "Wow, you're so brave, and it takes a lot of courage to do this." And in my head, I on my screensaver, I have my granddaughter. I've got 2 granddaughters. Like, none of us who have young girls in our lives want this to happen to them. Honestly, it doesn't really require bravery on my part. it really is about, we have a job to do here. This is not okay. But I really am encouraged by the accountability that's happened recently, although with Cosby's release, we'll be talking about that. So many questions to get to and comments to hear. Stacy, you and I have spoken on a few occasions on Zoom, and I am so struck by how your story mirrors the story of so many women. And your instinct when it happened, after you came, to consciousness again, your first instinct was to call the police, and then you opted not to call the police. We know that the world judges women who make that exact decision. Can you help us understand why someone who's been raped would not necessarily go to the police?
Well, my first instinct and the first thing that I did do was I went down to the hotel lobby because in my opinion, I was kidnapped as well. And I went down to the hotel lobby and I said, call the police. And dealing with these, I don't want to say these people, but people of power and fame, fortune, I just don't know if there's a different set of standards for them, but they knew who was staying there and they knew something had happened. And I said, call the police. And they didn't do that. So, I mean, even in this stupid state of whatever drug it was that I was given, unknowingly given, I still was turning around, looking over my shoulder, afraid that I was being pursued or followed, and I said, call the police. They didn't act as I wanted them to. They just said, what for? Started asking me questions. And then they said, well, let me go talk to the manager. Why? Why do they need to do that? Why can't they just
do what you say?
Call the police.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's an emergency. And this was probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And so I went out and I flagged down a cab myself. And the first thing I said to the cab driver was go to the police station. So I did attempt to go to the police.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, it didn't end up that way.
No. And the audience needs to know that some of these things, there's been so much to unpack about this story. Stacy, may I ask, you shared with me your thought process about what happens if you go to the police. Like, what were some of the dangers that stopped you? Do you remember that? And is it cool for you to share that with the audience?
I don't. I do remember. Actually, I remember.
And you don't have to say. You don't have to answer any of my questions that you don't want to if you don't feel comfortable.
Yeah. Well, all of this information that I'm speaking with you about is all factual. It was all given to the detectives, and a lot of it is public information. But I think that the reason that I had changed my mind, which I did in the taxi, was because I started thinking, and some people may have heard of like the 5-second rule. Some of you may not, but your brain has a certain amount of time to process a situation. And I mean, even at the young age of 21, I started thinking about a previous case that had happened a few weeks before. And in the end, I found out only years after, because I looked it up, which one that it was. And it was involving Mike Tyson, and a woman from Albany, New York, had accused him, and the media just trashed her. And that came to my head while I was in the taxi. And I thought, okay, if I do this, and my brain started thinking, how am I going to be treated? Will I be believed? What's this going to do to my family? Will the police even listen to me regarding the person that was the perpetrator? Um, you were talking earlier in your introduction, we're talking in the mid 80s. And as you say, we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have social media and we didn't have any ways of communication.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea how my parents had dealt with me and my lifestyle of traveling all over the world at such a young age. But you just went with it. But there was not the information about rape kits. There was not the information of this happens to you, go to. I mean, I didn't have a yellow page telephone book with me to look up and see, what do you do in this case? So I had to go with my gut feeling. And this is all what it all portrays. And the rest of the evening, my time shared with you and your audience, what I want to talk about is that so important gut feeling that you have to listen to.
Yeah.
Go ahead. My gut feeling was, and my brain was rationalizing and saying, can you fight this? Do you have the money?
Yep.
All these answers were no to everything.
Yeah.
Of course,
you were 21. You were a baby. My God.
Yeah.
So amazing. And so but that thought process, when people say, why didn't you go to the police? Some people characterize that as like a crazy thing. Why wouldn't you? Well, there are a lot of, you just painted the picture about why you wouldn't.
But Bonnie, if I may interrupt.
Sure.
I did share the information with the Chicago police officer.
And what do you want to say about that? I mean, when did that happen?
Like the next day after.
Oh, okay. And did they take it seriously?
No, it was a very close friend of mine who is, if ever there is some miracle change in the laws, which at this moment is not happening, we've got to work on. But I told him, I don't want to be public with this. I don't want to, I was terrified. And I just thought, what's this going to do to my family? And this is what I kept thinking.
Right. And that's how
what's going to happen to me? I have my whole life ahead of me. This is just going to ruin my everything.
So another thing you said, that for a long time after that, that was 1986, and for a period of time in your head, you were thinking you were the only one, that you were the only one that he did that to. And it was interesting, I follow these cases all the time, and the Harvey Weinstein case broke in 2017. And those women said, and there have been over 100 literally over 100 who have accused him of sexual assault. And those first few, they all thought they were the only one. What was that like for you, Stacy, when you realized that you were most definitely not the only one, and you were actually one of more than 60?
Well, and I found out that I was not the only one. You asked what it felt like. Well, it was heartbreaking to me, because first of all, I went through a feeling of guilt, of maybe if I had have done something more, maybe it wouldn't have happened to them. That I went through for a little bit, and it was a terrible, rough time processing all of this, and just knowing that there were others. And then it was like, okay, what do I do with this information now? Because I was in Spain, where I basically, I don't know if you want to call it it was a form of asylum or refugee or what, but I was running to get away because I did not want to see this person's face and it was and everywhere, and it was the number one program at the time. It was like the entertainer of at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I I thought, okay, what do I do with this information? Because I was getting messages from everywhere, people who knew my story, because I did not remain silent. I shared my story with my best friend, with my colleagues, with my boyfriend at the time. And I told them all of what had happened. And maybe some of them just didn't know what to do with the information either, until later other people started speaking out. And then they reached out to me and said, this is a serial predator. You need to go forward. And then it was like, how? My daughter, she was one of the first ones that says, Mom, I remember you told me this when you were 14, when I was 14, and you should go forward. And my husband, and once he said that, it was like, what a relief. And then it was okay, what do you do with this information? And who do you go to? And I'm in Spain, so I did not see the news. I did not get information. And we also have a data protection law. I couldn't even see a lot of the news or news clips or anything. And by the time I found out and kind of was processing it, there had already been other women that have come forward. And then it was like, okay, what attorney do you reach out to? And who? It was just, it was traumatizing all over again.
All over again, yeah.
Yeah.
And while we're on that subject, you said to me very honestly how that one night changed your life in every way. Could you talk about that? These things happen in a matter of hours, and it happened when you were 21, and yet the ramifications, and when everyone on the call is thinking about family members, children, grandkids, to think about amount of hours that when something happens, and then to have to live with it for a lifetime, and what does that do to a person? Can you talk us through what impact did it have on you, Stacy?
Well, the impact was, for me, it was life-changing. And I had just decided that I didn't want to be, I kept moving, as you said in the introduction. I kept moving from one apartment to another. I was just, terrified. When you're dealing with someone with so much power, fame and wealth, and you basically are, I don't like to say a nobody, but you do not have that same status. It's just completely different. So how it impacted me was I felt that I just needed to do what was best for Stacy. And what was best for Stacy at the time was, whenever I was confronted with it, I told the truth. And I always said, he's not the person you think he is, because you can't just go around telling everybody that detail.
Right.
And I started getting sick. It impacted my health.
Yeah.
It impacted my health, and I was hospitalized many times within a few months.
Yeah. And, none of that, that's the piece, those are the pieces that the world doesn't see, the aftermath of it. And you don't necessarily see trauma on the outside. You're a beautiful, articulate woman, but what is happening on the inside? And one of the reasons I feel so strongly about this is because I've gotten to meet too many than I can even count, who have horrifying stories. For a long time in the court case, I noticed that they referred to you as Jane Doe. Your real name was not used right away, and then your real name was leaked to the press.
Right.
You had managed to keep your story for many years. You didn't tell your father, your firefighter father. You hadn't told him the truth, but finally, especially after it got leaked, you knew that you wanted your dad to hear the real story from you. Can you tell us that story? You sent us a great picture of you and your dad together so that our audience can see what your tough firefighter father, that's a tongue twister, looked like, and what an adorable picture of you and your dad.
Yeah.
Can you tell our audience about, because I think everyone can relate to telling your parents or whoever has raised you something difficult that happened.
Right. I had chose, well, I was going back and forth of whether I wanted to come public and whether I wanted to do it in the way that others were doing so. And it just wasn't comfortable for me at that time. My brother was diagnosed that year with terminal cancer.
Right.
And this is what was going on in my life when I found out all about this. So my mom knew years before. I think she decided to kind of not deal with it and or not process it. But I had never told my father. And I never told my father because my father, as you mentioned, he was strict. He was well respected in the community. Everyone was terrified of him, including me. And he was just this typical protective father, and he was not emotional. He was, apart from that I had to carry on a certain grade point average, he was very protective of, my reputation and all of these things. And he was very harsh and stern when it came to discipline as well. And I just took it through these years that was his way of dealing with emotion. And when my brother was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and that was due to his job, my brother also was a firefighter, come from a long family of first responders.
Wow.
And he had gotten the news that he had esophageal cancer. And I thought, this is not the time. I cannot tell my father right now about this. It wasn't fair. And so I had asked the detectives to respect my wishes, and they said, that I could be called on the stand. And I said, please keep me Jane Doe until I'm on the stand. And I said, and give me an opportunity before it goes out to the public to give this information to my father.
Right.
Because I didn't want him to find out through reading papers if he ever did or saw it on the news, but he didn't. I don't even think he really even knew what was. I mean, he didn't follow it. And
yeah, but a neighbor probably would have.
Oh yeah, I mean,
this would have been so juicy. So you finally did it.
Well, I was just terrified. I thought, if he finds out in some other way, it's going to just really make things worse in our relationship. And we were close, but we weren't close because I moved far away at such a young age that I didn't have that closeness with my family that I should have had. And that also impacted me in a way that you never talked about. So when I decided that I needed to tell my father, it was, I had flown in for the sentencing, and I had to. It was just the hardest thing that I could do. I kept putting it off and putting it off until finally I said, and it was the day before I was taking the flight. And I remember being in the bedroom, booking my airfare and everything, and I still hadn't told him. And I had a moment alone, and he was sitting at the desk, and I said, Dad, I need to have a word with you. And he looks up, and I said, come on over here. Can we go to the table and have a talk? And he's like, oh my. And he had a Southern accent and very deep voice. And he sat down and he said, he looked at me sternly, and I told him, I said, I have something to share with you. I said, have you followed the William H. Cosby and Montgomery County court case? And he just didn't even know what I was talking about. And I said, have you been following, do you know about these women that have been speaking up, and there's a court case and it's gone to trial? And I knew that he knew about the guilty charges back then, because I happened to be in town and was trying to get to the trial, but my flight was delayed. And when that came through, I happened to be there. So I mean, I remember when it happened, my mother and I and my husband, we were shouting up and down, with joy that finally there was a little bit of justice. But he didn't pay attention to it. He was into his own things. So I said to him, I've got to tell you something, and I never was able to share with you this before. I said, because I was possibly called to be a witness, and I had to keep this secret because I couldn't let him think that I was hiding it from him all this time. Yeah. And he says to me, I said, so you know what I'm talking about? And he was like, oh my, and then he processed it, and he said, why didn't you tell me before? And I said, you're not the easiest person to talk to, and especially about something like this. And he says, why didn't you tell me before? And I said, because I didn't want to see you in prison. And that was how I had told him. And I decided to stay Jane Doe up until I was called on the stand. But apparently in the pre-trial, some of the media was showing the screens and leaked my name. And there was another Jane Doe who was to be a witness on the stand if the judge allowed us all to right. testify. And luckily he didn't see that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to change Jane Doe into Jane Doe. And I shared this with my father, and I was crying, and he was emotional, and I just was afraid of how he would react. And he said to me, everyone who knows you will believe you. And that gave me that indication that he was very supportive. And the next
he believed you. He believed you 100%.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Did it turn out to be true what he said, that everyone who knows you will believe you? Yeah. Was that true?
Yeah.
It was true. Fantastic. When you shared that, I lost my dad when I was 15, but I could so relate to what you said about how difficult it was, even hard for you to say it right now, about telling us the story, about telling him, about telling your parents something so hard. And honestly, anybody who's on this call who's a parent, I mean, they call us mama bears, when you have a kid and somebody does something bad to your kid, you do want to kill. Like, I could totally relate to you saying I didn't want to see you in jail, because you could totally picture him going after him, right? Would he actually have done something, do you suppose? You don't know.
I I mean, by the time I told him, he was too old to, although he was much younger than the perpetrator. um,
But
he,
he would have wanted to.
I assumed, and I can only assume,
Yeah.
he would have reacted as many fathers would.
Yeah.
But Bonnie, I also want to share with you that, and this is kind of a message to any of you who may be listening and you have something that you haven't shared. Right after I shared that with my father, our relationship changed 100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
For the
Yeah.
better. For the better.
Fantastic. And it was as if he respected me. And my father is, he's, I take a lot after my father. And as you said, he did teach me to become independent, very independent. And I had a lot of instances through my life that made me become strong and independent and resilient. Yeah. And anyhow, he did support me, and he was very, very proud of me for speaking out. And our relationship was great. And unfortunately, my father died last August, and
I'm sorry.
I didn't have that much time,
Mm.
with him, because this was 2018 when I finally did share this with him, and I spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things happening. COVID happened as well, but I happened to be there and I don't want to say stuck, but as soon as I arrived into the United States, the next day the borders were closed. So I had extra time. In hindsight, was just a blessing.
Yeah. So we should all know to share that.
Right.
So Nance is saying that many courageous women are surrounding you with love and understanding right now. I think that's really true,
Mhm.
Stacy. Thank you for sharing that. And that's
Yeah.
such a powerful story about your dad, man. That blew me away. So it's been really well publicized that Bill Cosby was released from prison ahead of schedule, and he's now a free man. What should we know about this, and what good do you think has come from you testifying in the case? And are you feeling optimistic about the accountability that's happening and about future cases that come up? And you'll let us know if you want to show that clip now or how you want to do that.
Yeah. I will let the clip speak for itself. It was a clip that was on July 10th, and I flew to Philadelphia again. This is I've spent a lot of time and money also, standing up for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I flew to Philadelphia, and I was joined with. It was a small last minute vigil. Um, I I reached out to the state of Arkansas, the coalition against sexual assault, and I told them what I was wanting to do, and they supported me 100%. And I will tell a little bit more about our coalitions, but I ended up flying to Philadelphia, and I was with a couple of the wonderful women who have spoken out, and it was still traumatizing, but it's just something that that you have to do. If Jen could go ahead and play that clip that was in Philadelphia, July 10th, it'll explain from NBC.
Jen, we don't have the audio. Jen, we're not hearing it. Although you can play it from right there. Oh, there's Stacy. The video is kind of speaking for itself, right, Stacy?
It is actually, I'm there with Lily Bernard and Victoria Valentino, and we're talking about why we went to Philadelphia, and it was just to stand up for our rights, and I'm talking there about the truth and how it happens everywhere. That's Jennifer Storm, who you just saw in the background. I'm indicating to the people of what we were there representing. We were there with the not only Jennifer Storm, that's Victoria Valentino again, who was another survivor. And in the background, you can see Caroline Heldman and a little bit of Lily Bernard. And there's Sherry Botman, who has also written a book about trauma in the background there. And well, of course, they always have to play parts. Victoria is talking about, it's just too bad that we don't have the soundbite there.
Yeah.
But, and that right there, that moment there was very emotional for me, because that in the background was one of my colleagues from American Airlines whom I told my story to.
Wow.
And she did not know I was going to be there. And I didn't know she was going to be there. So that was very emotional moment for me.
Amazing.
But anyhow, if anyone wants to see it with the audio, it is there with NBC Philadelphia, and other news outlets were there as well.
Yeah, it's NBCPhiladelphia.com, and all you'd have to do is Google Stacy's name. Amazing how much that, oh, and Jen just put the link in the chat. So hopefully we've got one more clip to play a little bit later. But what you know, so much must have been going through your minds after he was released from prison. He served almost 3 years in prison. What should we know about what this means, Stacy, in terms of sexual assault cases? What does it say to you, the fact that this man served 3 years, was released early on what in my research says it was a technicality? Tell us what you're thinking about that.
In my opinion, and I don't think that it's proven to be any different, that he was released on a technicality that did not prove that he was innocent. Of course, this was only the case with Andrea Konstad. And what this is telling us is that we all have to stick together, and we have to work on changing the laws. We need to remove the statute of limitations. There should not be a limit of time that someone has to speak out. I didn't even know about the statute of limitations at all. And as a matter of fact, I did share my story with a lawyer back in 1986, right after it happened, who was handling the pedestrian accident that I also survived.
You have lived a lot of life in your time.
Yeah. And I didn't think anything about it. Then it's just, I thought, okay, this is how it is. And this is how basically a lot of women, and certainly women of a certain age and more, have experienced it, that we didn't have any means to really speak out and speak our truth or know of what was going on. And we didn't know the laws. But sometimes we trust our stories with people who should be, who should lead us and guide us in the right direction and fight for us. That didn't happen. It didn't happen in my case, certainly. There is a lot of lawyers now who are working on sexual assault victims' rights, and we do have that backing, but we're only scratching the surface right now. This is such a bigger picture, and the statute of limitations should be removed for adults. I mean, for example, this happened to me when I was 21. Our brains are still developing until we're 25, 26.
So in Illinois, then what is the statute of limitations? And for those who don't know, what I understand is, I'm not a lawyer, of course, it's the amount of time that you have as the target of this kind of crime to report it. Is that right? It's a period of time.
Right.
So what was it? What you were supposed to have reported it within how much time? And
well, each state is different, which makes this so much more complicated. Mm-hmm. Each state is completely different with their laws. I personally think we should have a uniform system regarding sexual assault in the United States. And I think in Illinois at the time, because you have to go back at the time that it happened. Sure. I don't remember if it was 6 to 10 years. If there is any legal advisor listening, they can correct me on that. Could have been that it was 10 years maximum. At that time, I was living in Spain. I didn't know or have the information, and we have not only to change and remove the statute of limitations on sexual assault. We have to define consent into the laws. We have to do that. If we define consent into the laws, for example, in the Weinstein case and in the Cosby case, it could have been completely different picture. Could have been.
Because can you talk about that? Can you talk about consent and what's the definition of it, or is there none?
There is no definition of consent in our penal codes. There is no definition of consent in the penal code of many countries. And in Spain here where I'm living, I think I sent you a link of what women have been doing, and they're trying to change it where it's just that only yes means yes. But we have to define consent. And I started working with Joyce Short of the Consent Awareness Network, whom I also met at the July 10th vigil. And she was there in the background of that clip talking as well. She's written a book on consent, and she has a TED Talk, and she has a Consent Awareness Network. And she suggests that the language, the terminology used should be freely informed agreement. Freely given and informed agreement is what it is, the language that she thinks that we need to have into our laws. There might be a picture, Jen, that I don't know if I sent it to you regarding the Consent Awareness Network, the work that we were doing.
Do you know what? We didn't have a chance to get that one. But Jen, if you can put up the one with Stacy at the vigil, just to remind everybody about that. Because you're very busy from Spain working on laws, Stacy, in Spain as well as in the United States, or
wherever I can.
Wherever you can, yeah. This is the picture. If anyone is interested in knowing more about that day, and that happened this year. We're talking just a couple of months ago, July of 2021. Thanks, Jen. So, Stacy, you are actively working on laws in Spain and here and in the United States?
Correct, I am. I'm trying to work with the Consent Awareness Network. Joyce Short has approached New York and has a bill they're trying to get in front of legislators. I don't know if, Jen, did I send you that hashtag of the bill? It was, I don't know if you can put that up either.
If she can find it, we'll get that in.
You can put it up otherwise later on in the program. But there are some bills that are being presented, and it's to define consent into the law. And if anyone has any ideas of exactly how that we should frame this, because the legislators often are saying, freely given and informed agreement is maybe it's really not that clear. To me, it's clear. I think to you, Bonnie, it's clear, but we just need to make sure that there's no loophole.
Right. Well, ironically and related to this is the whole notion that my audience knows that I talk a lot about workplace bullying,
Right.
and the fact is that many states do not have laws against workplace bullying because there is no agreement on what how it's defined.
Right.
How do you define it? That one person's bullying is another person's, well, they're just having a bad day or they're just in a bad mood. So it's very subjective. And, I think part of the reason we're having this conversation today is, okay, yes, we need to fix the laws about statutes of limitation and consent. But when it comes to actually being in the workplace, actually having people relating to each other, to me, it is about putting the power of this problem right back with women. And to hopefully not even get to have to deal with the laws. And that when it's in the workplace, to be able to, we were talking, Stacy, you believe we ought to have sex education in schools with young girls as early as like age 10, right? That we need education for young girls, young boys, about right and wrong and about what is okay. I mean, every young girl can understand, like, we can picture what happened on that plane where you're being told, like, yes, you're an aspiring model, and you're being told, yes, this powerful person can help you with your career. We're socialized when we're young to of course want that kind of attention. How do we know anything else unless we're taught? Which is partly why we must talk. We need so much to address when it happens to you. Do you agree? Like, we have to get to it. I know you agree that we need to get to it way sooner.
Of course we do. Bonnie, since I have been speaking out publicly, you would not believe how many stories that people have shared with me.
Yeah.
Men and women, and even, women about their children. This is endemic in society. Yeah. And I think when you mention sex education, we need to be able, and this shouldn't be political. This is not political. It's not about race. It's not about anything else except correcting the system. And girls should be able to know their body parts at a young age. I feel, and I've had other women whom have been speaking out on behalf of their children who were sexually assaulted by a family member. They told me that they've been working and even in different countries. And this one in particular was in the Netherlands. And she said that they started teaching where in the schools that what's wrong with a girl saying, don't touch my vagina, don't touch my breast, or don't touch me there. We need to be able to speak
Right.
about these things and not shame or shun our bodies. It's
right.
It's ridiculous. And I think that once that you need to have the power to set your boundaries. And
Right.
once you can set your boundaries, then you have more strength to stand up for yourself.
Right.
And we need to teach children that we're going to listen to them. And adolescents. I was also assaulted as a teenager. And it's all abuse of power. It's all. I don't even
All
like
of it. Yes.
that
And when
we
these
call it sexual
stories
assault.
come up at our workshops, inevitably, if one woman shares her story, then there will be others who say, oh, that happened to me. And then that begins this whole series. Nina, thank you so much. I see you're very active in the chat. And this is the TEDx talk that Joyce Short did, When Yes Means No, the Truth About Consent. We need to get to leaders. about changing these laws and to support leaders who actually are looking honestly at what this issue is.
Mhm.
You know, quickly in one of my workshops, this issue came up, and the assistant is now in her 50s, and she shared the story. Though she'd been at her firm in New Jersey for over 30 years, and she
Mhm.
was recalling that when she was in her like late 20s and married, she was starting out as an executive assistant, very excited about her job, and she was at her desk, and her executive came up standing next to her, and he was rubbing up against her.
Mm.
And he did this numerous times, and no one had ever prepared her for this. And she shared with us through tears that she was paralyzed. She was mute. She had nothing to say because she didn't know the words to say.
Yeah.
That's where education comes in. So I said to her, I said, so what would you do if it happened today? And here she is like 30 years later. And she didn't hesitate. She was really strong. She said, I would have punched him in the face.
You're good.
And we all believed her. Like it was, but that's the point. It was so present for her. Just talking about it brought it all back, and it was real, and it was now, and it's not okay.
No.
It's just not. But no one had educated her about it. And the things that happened to me kind of pale in comparison to that. But this my feeling is strong because I can relate, and I don't want it happening to any of your kids. Like this has to stop. And how do we stop it? Is education.
Good.
So what else should we know about, what more can we do, Stacy, about these laws, about, and Nina too, consent and statutes of limitations? Should we contact our governmental leaders about this? Is that
We,
what has to happen?
that's what we have to do. And actually, I'm so happy that Nina chimed in on this, because Nina is a big advocate out of Pennsylvania, and she is
We can
also
tell. Go, Nina. And
yeah,
Nina,
go
feel
Nina.
free. Nina, if you want people to contact you as an expert, put your information, LinkedIn connection. I mean, Jen is going to put Stacy's LinkedIn contact information in the chat. Nina, you are welcome to do the same thing. We must share this information with each other so this stuff stops. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Stacy.
I forgot what I was saying. I was so enthralled with what you were saying.
Sorry. But
It
what
was
can we
great.
do? What can we do? You were happy that
We
Nina
have-
chimed in.
We have to contact our legislators. Whatever state you're in, you have to reach out to your legislator and tell them to define consent into the laws. There is a bill which Nina, if she can post up the hashtag that is that I was talking about earlier.
Codify consent, I think it is. I see it in the chat. Codify consent.
I'm not seeing these as you are. They're not coming up for me, or maybe I'm just behind. But codify consent.
Codify consent. There it is on the screen.
Yeah,
Can you see
yeah,
it?
yeah,
Great.
Yeah. So we need to contact our legislators. We need to write to them, no matter what party. I mean, we need all parties involved. And Nina, Joyce, myself, there's a whole group of us, and that can help in that. Actually, some of the other Cosby survivors have managed to change the statute of limitations, I think in 3 states, which was California, Nevada, and Colorado.
So what's the longest one now? What's the longest? Is there any state that says there is no statute of limitations, or it's, I don't know.
I think California removed the statute of limitations.
Totally. So there's no statute. There's no limitation.
If don't quote me on that. I had asked a couple of them to give me the information on the law that they've changed, and they hadn't gotten back to me before our discussion tonight. Yep. But they have changed the laws in some states, and we need to change it in all states. And they have changed the laws for the better since the trial. And for example, and some states for children. But why is there a cutoff age? Why is it just doesn't make any sense to me?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, why this age is the
Right.
bracket? Because
There's-
generally,
Yeah.
it's as I said, it's all abuse of power.
Mhm.
We have to.
Yeah. So, Stacey, I skipped over a question, but I think that's really important to ask. Over the years, you told me that people ask you the most ridiculous questions about rape and about sexual assault and how they just don't get it. Can you tell us what a few of those things are? The ridiculous things that people say that we should know about so that when we hear them, talked about with regarding people in our workplace or in our families, among our friends, what should we be prepared for? What's some of the ridiculousness you hear, please?
One of the most ridiculous things that I heard was, those women asked for it, and another thing was they were all paid, which is complete BS.
You were paid to speak.
No. Well, they were all paid.
Oh, they were
that they should just shut their mouths and not speak up or do anything, because for some reason everyone and thinks that we received money or some law settlement. They're show me the money. I have not received any money. There was no justice for me and for many of the women. The one thing, I was speaking in front of a group, and actually it was the first time I did speak out. Someone approached me and said, why is it that when women, after they are sexually assaulted or raped, they become more promiscuous? And I instantly said, well, that is not true. A lot of women have never had a relationship again after, and
which is something most people don't know.
Well, I can tell you, even from my own personal experience, I'm not going to tell you about my sex life, but I can tell you that trauma, as I said, it doesn't go away.
Yep.
And then many women have, when they get to that moment which we're all supposed to enjoy. I think a sexual relationship is to be enjoyed, and I mean, I could even go into more details. I don't know. I'm sure you have a mature audience, but
say whatever you want to say.
It should be a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But when these things happen, sometimes you get that in your head, and I have even myself had to teach myself. You have to focus and be in the present and now, and this all happened after the trial, and it didn't occur before, but it was when I started speaking out.
Right.
And these are just things that just come out, because you have all of this embedded in for so many years, and it just takes time to sleep out. And that's why we don't need a statute of limitations either, because it takes time, and people need to go forward when they're ready. Right. But the question that the gentleman asked me was why women are promiscuous. I said to him, maybe they are, some aren't, maybe some never have a relationship again. And I said, I could imagine that it's like, possibly you fall off a bike, or for example, myself, I was in a snorkeling accident, another one of those 9 lives. And the next day I decided to go back in the water so I wouldn't have a fear. Maybe that's the way they're rationalizing, and keep thinking, okay, they keep trying and keep trying.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're promiscuous. Who's to judge?
Oh
No
my
one's
God.
judging.
Yeah. There's so much blaming of the survivor. I don't even like to ever use the word victim. I hate the word victim, actually. And I know you and your sister survivors. That's the words you use. I, I hear the other kinds of stories. Well, I hear stories about how, women who are raped or assaulted are blamed because of the way they dressed. It was their fault as opposed to the person who attacked them. But then there are the women who shared that in the aftermath of an assault, one particular student who I'll never forget, she consciously gained about 75 pounds in order to intentionally try to not be attractive to men. I had a group of young 20-something college students who we were talking about discrimination and racism at the end of last year. I'll never forget. They were from a very well-known university, and we were talking about, the ways in which young women are discriminated against. And there's a stereotype about Latino women that they're more promiscuous than others, and sometimes about African American women. And to a person in this group of young women, they all agreed that when they go to the gym, that they intentionally wear no makeup, they wear really baggy clothes, they, shove their hair up in a hat in order to not attract attention. So it's so warped what's happening. So we need to stop this, shaming of a person who's being assaulted. You've referred to sexual assault and rape as a public health crisis.
Exactly.
And you called it endemic, and you have advice for people listening on this call about this public health crisis. Can you tell us more about that point of view on it, and give us language so we can talk about it too like that?
Well, to me, it's a public health crisis because a lot of people, when this happens to them, it's not something always that they can talk about or have someone that they can, a mentor that they confide in. And some people, they end up having substance abuse. They end up with eating disorders. They may have chronic health conditions.
Yes.
And
they pay a price. They pay a high price.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I remembered that when, I too have chronic health conditions. And I remember that, that bell went off when I was with my internal medicine doctor. And he kept saying, he was like the house of the hospital, or the Costa del Sol area.
Yeah.
And he said, everyone said, go talk to him about it. And I had a chronic pain for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily I never took pain medications. I looked for alternative ways through meditation and stretching and acupuncture, you name it, I tried. But some people, they ended up with addictions, and we have to address this as a public health crisis.
Yes.
If we want to address drug abuse, alcoholism, health conditions, because no one, if you start asking someone who has a chronic health condition, chronic pain for a long time, if you start asking, has anything happened to you and that you haven't shared, or you in your life? Because when the doctor said to me, it's like something like you had a trauma or something. And he even asked me, he said, where did you grow up? Did they have lead in the water? And I'm like, well, I had brain cancer. I survived. And I had this and I had this. But this all started from the age of 21. And then it was like, okay, it's,
yeah. I mean, if there's any other piece of good news happening out in the world right now, it's that with the pandemic, there's a lot of attention being paid inside companies to health and wellness.
Right.
And, the stress and anxiety is off the charts. So mental health is being paid attention to. So, for everybody listening on the call, perhaps that is a glimmer of good news about leaders listening to the issues that are in play here. I think Stacy is so right about the addictions that are happening. But I'd like to go into that next question, Stacy, about that you specifically asked me to be on the show. When we talked about you coming onto the show, you wanted to talk to executive and personal assistants about abuse of power and the things that they can do on a day in, day out basis. So do we want to play the 60 minutes clip, or just tell us how you want to answer that one?
If you don't mind, let's just wait a second on that. I reached out to you thanks to a gentleman who I think is listening tonight. I don't know if I'm using his name.
I hope he's there.
And anyhow, he told me, he says, because I reached out to him and I said, I have this abuse of power class, and I think that you should be sharing this with your assistants. And he says, no, you need to talk to Bonnie Low-Kramen, whom I didn't know of before. And luckily, he did suggest that I get in touch with you.
Now we're practically related. Yeah.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Your house tomorrow night, okay?
Okay.
I thought, okay, what happened to me? It all started with a personal assistant. It was that personal assistant that I shared the limo with. And I thought, why isn't it that we aren't addressing this more? Because personal assistants, executive assistants, are so vulnerable, and they can be enablers, either willingly or unwillingly, by their actions. And this was the whole point. So I thought, okay, I'm going to reach out to whomever, and I wanted to start an abuse of power class, which I address many issues. I have lawyers in the class joining and talking about non-disclosure agreements, about clauses to have in it. I talk about other survivors. I'm also in touch with the Epstein survivors, the Weinstein survivors.
Wow.
And I found out through some of the research that I wanted to share with the students in the institute in Barcelona, where I started this abuse of power class. And it was a lifestyle institute, a postgraduate that I wasn't aware even existed, and neither did anyone else talk about this. And I said, are you addressing this issue? And do you have an ethics committee? And then they started thinking about it, and they're like, you're right. Here, you develop this, and we will let our students. So I started collaborating with them. And I found this clip that I'm going to ask Jen to play, because it is such a broader picture, and it'll explain through the clip.
This is from Australia, 60 Minutes.
Correct.
Hope we have audio here. Jen, help with the audio. No, for some reason, we're not getting the sound.
Well,
darn.
I guess all right.
That one would have.
Well, in this clip, she's talking about the fact that we have Epstein and we had Weinstein, and then she starts to talk about the man in the photo, who is Gerard Marie, who was the head of the elite modeling agency, and all the allegations that came out regarding what he was doing to models. And I invite everyone to look at this clip, because there is an undercover agent who is a model, and he even does these things to this undercover agent. And there are a whole list of models who have come forward. And this is, again, abuse of power. And it doesn't have to be just someone of the celebrity or of wealth. I mean, this can be a teacher of an association of your church, anyone who has anything above.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's why I call it all abuse of power, because, and it's in so many aspects, and I try to cover it in that. So I do want to give a shout out to the Institute who allowed me to do that. And I want to continue to work through whomever is willing to get these going, because we all have to work together, not compete with each other, especially women. Women need to work together.
So, Stacy, you are teaching classes. So, if there's anyone listening on this call, Stacy will happily. Jen is including her LinkedIn profile in the chat. Stacy would correct me if I'm wrong, but you would love to speak with anybody who is looking to bring you in to be a speaker, and to negotiate whatever the arrangement could be, knowing you're in Europe. But what we are in total agreement about is that the profession of assistance is 95 to 98% female, and that we know that the primary targets of sexual assault and harassment are female. It's not that this doesn't ever happen to men, but it's so tiny a percentage. So really, we're talking about men preying on women. That is the primary way it's going down. And the purpose of today is to put the power back in women's hands. Let me tell you quickly that when the Weinstein story broke in October of 2017, and he was on the cover of Time magazine, and it was a very big deal at the time. The next month, I was in Vienna, Austria, speaking at a conference, and there were assistants there from 20 different countries. And so the group from Belgium were sitting together, and Spain and Italy and Germany, and on and on. And because the story was so fresh, people were asking me about it. And that to a person, I said to the Belgians, so is this a problem in Belgium? Yes. Like every country I asked, these women said yes. And they said that they are so happy that it's exposed in America now, because it's now going to make it easier for them in Europe and wherever they were from to bring it to their leaders and to expose the problem. If there's, as we're winding down today, if there's any message you're taking away, it's that Stacy, you said earlier that, we all want to believe that someone is going to be watching out for us. In many cases in the workplace, that means our executives, our managers. And what we find out is that that's not happening in many cases. We can't leave it up to them. We cannot do that. That's why, as Stacy just said, we have to share information with each other, educate one another, offer resources like that are in the chat today. Jen, you're going to be populating with more books. Stacy, you have some books and resources that you're referring our listeners to, right? So for more education of themselves about this issue.
Well, there's one book that helped me tremendously just understand the whole picture of trauma. And it was recommended to me by a dear friend who works with the gentleman, and he had formed an organization called Sparking Life. And this deals with people who have addictions and they get over their addictions through exercise. And he suggested, he asked me if I had any trauma or anything. And it was like, well, I didn't know those times I was in the hospitalized with all this severe vomiting, that it was a form of PTSD. I just went on with everything. And you tend to put the excuse of something else on.
That's what women do in general. That's what women do, right?
Right.
We deny and we just barrel forth. We go forward.
So one book that I recommend anyone to read, male, female, it doesn't matter. And it's called The Body Keeps Score. And it's by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And another one that I always have with me, and it's The Polyvagal Theory by Dr. Stephen Porges. And it's basically, well, actually, I have it here. It's on transforming power of feeling safe. And this one is one that you will go back to and refer a lot. And it just makes you feel good. And I have not received yet. I've just ordered, but I'm in Spain. I'm not always in Spain. I can be anywhere I need to be at any time. Um,
Well, COVID, dependent,
well,
right?
I'm vaccinated, but anyhow, this is an important issue, so I want to do
Yeah,
whatever, wherever.
right.
But the other one is Andrea Konstad just wrote a book that was published just last week on the 14th, and it's called The Moment, and she talks about her story and healing and everything.
Yeah.
So I haven't read that yet, but I'm sure, knowing her, that it's a great book. Joyce Short has written a book about consent, which you can also check out on the Consent Awareness Network. And I'm sure that you cover a lot of these issues too in your book with the Ultimate Assistant.
Well, I do. There's a chapter about the dark side of this business. And in the new book that I'm working on, that'll be out in the beginning of 2022, this most definitely is in there. Because frankly, a lot of books about the workplace do not deal as honestly as we've been talking today about this issue. And clearly it's impacting so many. I mean, the data says 1 in 4 women have been sexually assaulted. And some of the experts say that that's probably underplaying it, that it's underreported because of the sense of secrecy around the issue. Stacey,
We're
yeah,
50% of the life force here. I mean, 50% of the population is women.
yes,
So do the math. I mean, and almost every other person you talk to has a story.
yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. And you don't have to scratch very far or ask too many questions if someone feels safe. The reason there's all this silence around the issue is because what I see are a great many women do not feel safe saying the story, because we hear, I mean, you've shared that sometimes people can be pretty ugly in response to knowing the truth. Would that be right, Stacey?
Exactly. Don't read those comments.
Yeah.
People can be ugly, and especially when they're anonymous, and they, if you could just take off the mask, you will see it, that they won't say the things that they do. Just use your voice and stay strong.
Well, we are so grateful that you were here today with us, and we will continue this conversation. We know that a 90-minute program is not going to solve this very messy, complicated, painful issue. However, we took a stab at it, and thank you, Stacey, for all the great resources that you've provided. Please connect with Stacey on LinkedIn, hire her for a speaking engagement to address your organization or your company. This issue is costing money. It is a public health crisis, but worst of all, it's impacting people's lives. What happens in a few hours impacts you forever. I mean, really? That can't be okay with everybody on this call. I mean, even, I hope there are a lot of men listening on the call, and you have mothers and sisters and maybe daughters and granddaughters. When that assistant had that happen to her, with her executive coming up next to her, one of the things to say to an executive is, how would you feel if that happened to your daughter? What if I was your wife here? What would you say to that? We must come up with the language. We can't be mute or paralyzed. We have to come up with the language that will address these issues when they come up. So Stacey is ready to take your questions on LinkedIn. Certainly Bonnie at BonnieLow-Kramen.com is where you can find me. We are taking next week off because Vicki Evans and I are headed to Houston for Be the Ultimate Assistant. We're going back live finally. So glad about that. And we will be back for Heads Together the following week, but on Tuesday. That week, Tuesday, September 28th, it will be at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Jen will be posting on social media, but that week we're going live on Tuesday afternoon. We thank you for showing up for being here to give your comments and your questions. Nina, particularly, I want to give a shout out to you for all the great resources that you provided. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Stacy Pinkerton, mwah, thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing your story.
Thank you, Bonnie. I have to. It's been a pleasure. And thanks to you, Jen.